we have all these programs, and yet we still have all these people struggling financially and living at below or near the poverty line. What's going on?
Yeah, so David, thanks for that primer, and Amy, thanks for the tee up. Even to zoom out, when we think about poverty and like how we define it, I think in like layman's terms, it's just people not having enough money in their pockets, right? And we solve that by trying to bridge the gap between the costs that are required to achieve a certain standard of living and the money that people have to be able to meet those costs, right? And the safety net is how we address the latter by, as Amy mentioned, putting money in people's pockets to let them achieve financial security. And as David discussed, we have this robust network of federal and state benefits programs, whether they be income supports or tax credits or subsidies. But there are several ways in which the programs are designed that lead to eligible beneficiaries not getting the help that they need. And that can happen because of the patchwork nature of the programs or other features that just lead to undesirable outcomes for people who are eligible. And to be clear, there are countless challenges, but I'm going to name three that I think are mentioned most often when we're in community across the state talking to folks who are navigating these benefit systems. The first really is that it's just quite complicated to enroll in all of the programs that you might be eligible for. Applicants have to navigate different platforms that require different sets of information to receive benefits from different programs. Some of these programs are administered by the federal government, some are administered by states or counties. And often receiving help from the government to navigate these processes is difficult to come by, to say the least. And so the outcome of this is that applicants who are already resource constrained, both in terms of cash and time, have to spend an inordinate amount of time and sometimes even lost wages to try to get the help that they need. Many in our field describe this as the time tax, because it really is a tax on people's time and ultimately their resources to be able to get the help that they're eligible for. And as a result, we have millions of Americans and hundreds of thousands of Californians not availing themselves of the benefits that they otherwise qualify for. For example, David mentioned the TANF program. In California, our version of TANF is called CalWorks. It's just we get a block grant from the TANF program, we administer it at the state level. Only about 60% of eligible California families are enrolled in CalWorks. That's actually a higher uptake rate than many states, but in our context, it still leaves hundreds of thousands of families on the table not receiving the supports, the direct income supports that they need to feed their families, right? The second challenge is a phenomenon that many of us in the field call the benefits cliff. Many of you will be familiar with the dynamic where an individual on public benefits might experience a small increase in their income only to have a sudden decrease in the public benefits that they receive because they now earn too much to qualify for the money that they previously got. So it puts beneficiaries in a really impossible position where they're having to choose between improving their earned income but ending up worse off or stalling their present income to maintain their benefits. And it's a real catch-22 that oftentimes leads to people opting for not getting a raise at their job or an increase in the income they get from a job because they know that they're going to come out worse off on the back end. So it leads to bad incentives. And the third challenge is an underlying bias against beneficiaries that so often like shapes their experience in navigating all of these systems. And it manifests in a number of ways, from feeling dismissed and unwanted when interacting with the system, both because of like personal interactions, but also when the system itself and like the technology isn't user friendly, it leads to a lot of burnout, right? Like I think we've all navigated really difficult customer service interactions, not because people are mean, but just because you have to like dial one like a bunch of times just like sort of make your way through. It's really frustrating, right? So there's that angle, and there's also like the structural bias that sees programs like TANF in our CalWorks program here at home have features like work requirements that don't actually lead to increased workforce participation, or even sanctions leveled against participants who fail to adhere to certain program requirements, leaving them actually getting fined, which is kind of crazy when you realize the population that we're talking about. But all of this is really borne out by a bias that tends to assume that applicants are like fraudsters or fraudulent until proven otherwise, rather than the other way around. So the bias oftentimes manifests in a lack of customer service that makes it difficult for people to access.
What do we want to advocate for? What are 21st century solutions that address some of the challenges that the previous programs had? Where do we go from here? And I'm going to leave it to David or Devon, who wants to take this one first.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think there are a few things that we can do at the state level now that can be hopefully replicated at the federal level next time that there's a sympathetic government for these types of programs. And these are things that we actually have a fair body of evidence to support are really effective anti-poverty measures. I think the general like disposition that I have towards these things is removing the filters that exist between someone who needs cash assistance and that person receiving cash assistance. We talked a lot about the time tax and the benefits cliff and the biases that exist in the system. If we're able to remove some of those barriers in the bureaucracy that can oftentimes lead to people falling off as they're going through an application, we're going to see more money in people's pockets, and as a result, less poverty, which is great. I think the first example of us seeing this play out in practice is guaranteed income, where recipients consistently receive money directly with no strings attached. My organization was founded by a guy named Michael Tubbs, who was the former mayor of Stockton, California. During his time, he ushered in the first mayor-led guaranteed income pilot. This was back in 2018, where 125 low-income residents of Stockton received around $500 a month for 2 years. There were clear impacts on both the short-term and long-term earnings of people, better health outcomes, and people spent the money in the ways that any of us would on groceries, utilities, school supplies, food for their kids. And these pilots have been replicated many dozens of times over across California and across the nation, even across the world. And we've seen consistently really strong results for people who are beneficiaries of these pilots. I think step two for this, of course, is thinking about how we transition from pilots to policy. How do we take the lessons of guaranteed income and implement them into the existing safety net that we have, where those values are able to emerge? Those values being ease of access, not being paternalistic on how people spend the money, reliability, predictability with how your income changing might lead to differences in the benefit that you receive. But I think we can actually introduce a lot of reforms to our existing programs to better reflect the values that are espoused by guaranteed income. But it's going to require some steps around streamlining the programs to increase ease of access, making sure that there's no wrong door for you to be able to receive the help that you need, removing the needless barriers to entry, and of course, lifting restrictions on how people can use the funds, because we've seen time and time again from direct cash programs that people spend the funds in ways that we would deem as responsible, but I think it's quite predictable because ultimately the way that people spend the money is the way any of us would. The good news, I think, to build on this is, like David and Amy had mentioned, we've seen some versions of this at the federal level that have had tremendous success. I think most notably, though not perfect, the expanded child tax credit from 2021, which was in a way kind of a form of guaranteed income that saw families with children receive anywhere from, at least during this year in 2021, $3,000 to $3,600 per child, no strings attached. And again, people spent the money in the ways that any of us would. And of course, didn't reach everyone, but the effects were amazing. Maybe one of the greatest anti-poverty actions since LBJ's Great Society, where we saw record lows of poverty overall and a child poverty rate that was cut in half within a year. Really, really big stuff. Unfortunately, that expanded version of the program didn't last after Senate Republicans, frankly, killed the program the following year. And unfortunately, we saw in 2022 the single largest one-year increase in poverty in American history. And in California, we saw a child poverty rate rise from 7.5% to nearly 17%. So the rolling back of the expanded CTC during the first years of the Biden administration had really bad effects. But the point is that we know that expanding both access and the size of the award for the child tax credit does have a really meaningful impact for middle class and working class families. So that means that we can replicate it next time that there is a sympathetic government in power. We can actually do more than what Republicans are proposing right now in the reconciliation bill.